Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks and in the Orlando area of Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political commentator Al Spry, and we happen to have a wonderful gentleman sitting here with us, as you can see, and that's Dr. Jim Clark of the University of Central Florida.
Jim specializes in Florida history, and he's got a brand new book, A Concise History of the State of Florida. We're going to take a look at it, and hopefully you're going to hear some very interesting stories as we go along.
Much shorter than the encyclopedic history of Florida.
There you go. Stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
I'm political commentator and raconteur Al Spry. It's great to be here with you guys. I'd like to tell you, we're not only on 80 stations across Florida. That would be bad enough. But we're also on TV where you can see our ugly mugs. We are on Tuff TV 38, Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sunday mornings at 9 a.m. You can get us right over the air with an HD antenna you can pick up at the Radio Shack and elsewhere. Very cheap and easy way to get us. We're also on Channel 69 on the Summit Broadband Cable TV system. And if you want to get us on Bright House or DirecTV or Dish, just call your rep and say, I want my Tuff, Tuff, TV.
There you go. That's it. All right. Well, in studio with us today is my dear friend from the University of Central Florida and colleague in the History Department, Dr. Jim Clark. And Jim, as always, it's nice to have you with us in person.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
Yeah. Al, I thought we're going to start off with talking about a gentleman who had been here on the program several times.
Yes, and I think that may have contributed to his death. No, just kidding. Tom Slade, described as one of the smartest, funniest, and most consequential political operators in modern Florida history, died at 78. Retired USF St. Pete political scientist Darrell Paulson says, quote, I can't think of anyone as instrumental in the development of the modern Republican Party as Tom Slade, the folksy and blunt former Florida legislator and chairman of the GOP Party of Florida from 93 to 99, died Monday at Orange Park Medical Center following heart failure he suffered last week after choking on meat at a restaurant. People need to learn the Heimlich maneuver. Yeah. You know, that's real important, actually.
Tom
not to make light, but
Tom was very important. He was the chairman of the Republican Party in Florida during that time when we made the big switch from the Democrats running everything to the Republicans. He was a part of that Tom Gallagher, Jim Smith crowd that came in. Jeb Bush, of course, lost the governorship to Lawton Childs, and Tom Slade had just become the chairman. 4 years later, he came back and won the governorship. Tom Slade was still the chairman, and Tom Slade presided over the Republican Party as they took control of the Florida House and the Florida Senate and the governorship, and have held all of it ever since.
Yeah, people don't realize that until the 1950s, Florida elected its governor in the same year as presidential elections. And the Democrats controlled the state back then. They were worried that a popular Republican like Dwight Eisenhower would swamp the ticket and a Republican governor would sneak in.
Yeah.
So the Democrats moved the election to off years.
Is that what happened? That's a good trick, and we have had it ever since.
And it came back to bite them.
It came back to bite them, and it helped the Republicans into power. And so Republicans now run in off years, which is always a better time for the party out of power.
It is, because people, they're talking now about the Democrats pretty much losing the Senate, and we're going to have a GOP in the Senate and the House because it's an off-year election with an unpopular Democratic president. So
and that happens to lots of presidents.
And, especially in the second term.
It helps the party out of power.
They outsmarted themselves.
They really did. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the election because Jeb Bush is the only Republican to win a second term as governor.
Well, it's also
right.
going to be interesting because you have a third-party candidate named Adrian Wiley, who's the only party candidate who came on Florida Roundtable. The other two were too chicken. And so he may split the conservative Republican vote. You never know.
Isn't he the only one who doesn't have a driver's license? Doesn't he refuse to get a driver's license?
I don't know about that. That I
told
didn't
me
ask him.
Is that right?
His point of pride is not having a driver's license.
Okay.
All right, so maybe he could be like Walking Lawton. You know? But in any regard, more absentee ballots are being returned by the GOP members, by Republicans, 49 to 35% in terms of absentee ballots counted so far, 888,000. Interesting.
Yeah. All right. I'll tell you what, we're going to take a little bit of a pause along the network line here, and we'll remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And, of course, in Orlando on Tuff TV 38. We don't want to forget that. Our very special guest, Dr. Jim Clark from the University of Central Florida, his brand new book, A Concise History of Florida. And we will continue our conversation following these messages. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And Al, as promised, we are joined in the studio today by our dear friend, Dr. Jim Clark, my colleague from the University of Central Florida in the History Department. And Jim, nice to see you again.
It is great to be here again.
Oh, wow. It's been a little bit of a while, but you have been busy, as you always are, and you've got a brand new book out now. This one is from the History Press, and it's entitled A Concise History of Florida. Wow.
It is. It's an exciting book. So many of us come from the North.
Oh, yeah.
And we don't know Florida history.
No.
So I was talking to someone the other day. We all know that today Tallahassee is the capital of Florida. But did you know that Havana was the capital of Florida twice as long
as
right? Tallahassee has been?
Wow.
So, people don't understand our...
I knew Castro has been in power a long time, but that actually really surprises me.
Okay, Al, I got one for you. How many original colonies were there?
Well, I was always taught that there were 13 original colonies.
See, and he would be wrong.
Would I? Tell me why.
There are 15 original colonies. People leave off East and West Florida, which were British colonies, but refused to join George Washington and the boys. We remain loyal to the king, so people don't talk about us. They only talk about the 13 colonies, but we were part of the British Empire during that period.
And you know what? Nobody talks about it, but you're right, because we didn't join in the revolution. Is that what it was?
I think people are ashamed of us, but also everybody is.
Hey, nothing's changed.
No,
we're still the laughing stock of America.
We are. We have weird stories 200 years ago, and nothing has changed. But people don't realize how different Florida is. That most people studied history from the British point of view. The Jamestown settlers, the Pilgrims, the first Thanksgiving. The first Thanksgiving was in Florida 100 years before the Pilgrims. And
tell us about that. I'm interested in that.
DeSoto, moving up through what is now Tallahassee.
They named a car after him.
They did. They named a car, and now they don't make those cars anymore. Remember the big taxi cabs? DeSoto taxi cabs with the moon roofs, the original sky roofs. But DeSoto had the first Thanksgiving near present-day Tallahassee with the Indians in the 1500s. So, and of course, we study those poor Jamestown settlers and how they suffered that first winter and starved. And if they had sailed a few hundred miles south, they could have checked into a hotel in St. Augustine and gotten room service.
I know.
There was no reason for that.
Why suffer?
Yeah.
And that's what I ask all my northern friends. I say, why suffer? Why don't you come down to Florida? But they want to stay up there and suffer. And so, it's better. It's probably better for the population growth that it doesn't go too fast down here anyway. I
think, it's interesting because we have been for several years now the number 4 state in population. And the Census Bureau, of course, is always a little behind, but I wonder if we've already passed New York.
I was told that we passed New York late last year, and we're now the third largest state in the union.
There are no numbers yet.
Yeah,
so
not officially.
But I mean, when you consider that Florida during World War II was the smallest state in the South, had tiny numbers of people. I told somebody the other day that as late as the end of World War II, Spartanburg, South Carolina was bigger than Orlando.
Wow.
People don't realize how small Florida was. And there was no room for...
And there really went, I remember so well, and it's been a number of years ago, but I'll show you a piece of Florida history from this very room. Bob Graham was our senior United States Senator when we began the new millennium. And he came and did the first show of 2000 with us in person. And I said to him, what do you think was the most important invention that allowed of that century that allowed Florida to come forward? Can
I answer?
Sure.
I'm just taking a guess. I'm going to say air conditioning.
Absolutely, that was the senator's answer. He said, without air conditioning, we'd still be about the size of Spartan, South Carolina.
Well, yeah, because nobody, the summers are warm here, and
you noticed that, Al.
I have. I've perspired many a time, even with air conditioning, and it's kind of funny. But Florida used to be pretty much the Panhandle, right? Nobody ventured down this way.
No, it's amazing that that most of the population was from Jacksonville to Pensacola. It's only been in the last 50 or 60, 70 years that the peninsula has started to fill out. Amazing transition beginning after World War I with the land boom. As late as mid-1920s, you could buy land on beachfront land in Miami Beach for $1,000.
Wow.
Seems,
Well, it's funny because the 2000s was not the first boom and bust in Florida. We had a big boom and bust in the 1920s.
Florida has always had this cycle of boom and bust. Going back to the 1800s when banks failed. Florida, the original Florida Constitution outlawed banks.
You see, they were ahead of their time, guys. They should have kept that in there.
Well, I've seen pictures of this. They should have been suspicious when the banks began issuing $3 bills.
That's awesome. So let's go back to the beginning and let's ask, how did Florida come to be? We talk about St. Augustine being the oldest city. Let's fill that story out and add some. How did we get Florida?
It started with a political battle between Ponce de Leon and the son of Christopher Columbus over who could be governor of Puerto Rico, which was very valuable. And Ponce had the job, but Columbus's son said, wait a minute, my dad's original agreement says the family gets to keep Puerto Rico. So the king decided to give it to Columbus's son, and as a consolation prize, told Ponce he could go in search of lands to the north. And when he landed on Florida, originally Florida stretched from present-day Key West to Washington, D.C., and over to the Mississippi River. It was the entire what's now the southern United States.
Was Florida originally.
And it's been shrinking ever since. And what they quickly found was that there's no gold in Florida.
This was very disappointing.
Well, it was. It's funny because the Indians were pretty smart. They some of the early maps show a mountain range running down the middle of Florida.
Yeah.
Because the Spanish would ask the Indians where the gold was. The Indians would truthfully answer, "There's no gold." And they'd kill the Indians, assuming they were lying. So the Indians quickly learned to say, "Oh, it's right up the road there. You can't,
it's in the mountains.
Yeah, it's right in the mountain range. You can't." So they quickly found there was nothing here, and we're going to leave. There was no reason for the Spanish to stay, but they found two things. One, the Pope wanted Spain to spread Christianity to the Indians. And so he issued an edict. So they sent lots of priests over. Second, and more importantly for Spain, they discovered the Gulf Stream, which ran right by Florida, and all the Spanish gold and silver ships had to sail by Florida. The pirates knew that, would just camp off the coast. So Florida was started to protect Spanish ships. It had no value of its own. So for Spain, it was a pain in the neck. It was a fortress and a church, but it produced no revenue for Spain. It was always a money loser.
And it was hot.
And it was hot. It was miserable. Yeah. If you were named governor of Florida, you knew your career was over with.
It's like being named governor of Alaska now.
Yeah. It's kind of like, where is that again?
You're named governor of Siberia. So go have fun.
Exactly.
Before we wrap up this first segment, something I should have asked you right at the very outset, Jim, and that is, what made you decide? I mean, yes, you've been teaching Florida history for a long time now. Before your UCF days, you were a historian and columnist and the Orlando Sentinel. You've been dealing with Florida history for a long time. So what made you decide that a new edition, a concise history of Florida, was necessary?
You know, the amazing thing about Florida is, and we forget this, it is still fairly new. Again, most of us are first-generation Floridians. And so I found that there is not the great literature there is about other states. You know, if you look at Massachusetts, there are about 10 histories of Massachusetts. We don't have that legacy here. So
now we do. We have the concise history of Florida.
We do. Yes.
So that's great. So the Spanish are here. When do the Brits come?
The Brits get Florida in the 1700s after the French and Indian War. Spain and France lose that war, and Spain is given a choice. They can keep Cuba or they can keep Florida, and they pick Cuba. Cuba's much more valuable. So the British come here and are only here for 20 years. And then they lose the American Revolution, and now they have to leave, and the Spanish come back.
So what happens when we win the revolution? We get the other 2 colonies? We get 15 colonies then?
Yeah, we're up to 15, and then we add Vermont and Alabama and Mississippi.
And then when does Florida become a state? It's a territory for a long time.
It's a territory for about 24 years. It doesn't have the population, and finally becomes a state in 1845. I love it. You know, we have got to have the most boring state flag in America. It's white with the little symbol in the middle and a big X, a big red X. It's you look at flags like Maryland, which really has a neat flag, but the Florida had the neatest flag for the first inauguration of a governor. It had 3 colorful stripes like orange and green and white, and in big letters across it, it said, "Leave us alone." I want to bring back that flag.
I like that flag.
New Hampshire has "Don't Tread on Me."
Yeah.
And ours was "Leave us alone."
Leave us alone.
Isn't that a great flag?
Yes. See, I grew up in Ohio, which is the only state of all 50 that has a pennant. It's not even a square.
I know. You couldn't follow everybody else?
I have no idea. We need to take a little bit of a pause along our network line here and remind the folks that they're listening to the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest today, Dr. Jim Clark from the University of Central Florida History Department. His brand new book, A Concise History of Florida, should be available at fine bookstores.
It's at Barnes & Noble, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. Everywhere.
And we'll continue in a moment. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day in studio with us is Dr. Jim Clark from the University of Central Florida History Department. And Jim, it's always a pleasure to have you here with us. Your brand new book, A Concise History of Florida, from History Press, Barnes & Noble, and I mean, it's out there. This is, How long did it take you to put this together? I mean, there's so much information.
Well, as you know, I had written the book about Orlando, history of Orlando, and the press came back to me late last year and said, hey, how about a book on Florida? There was real need. And so, I'd been teaching Florida history. I knew Florida history. So it really became a labor of love.
Yeah.
I knew so much about it. It would take me years to do this on some other state.
Right. But since you knew, and it's really nice. It has pictures and it has timelines, and it's a nice book, and it's a easy book to read. It's a really cool book. You get a lot of photographs, and it's a really nice piece of work.
Yeah,
so
people know so little about their state. I mean, people will retire here and they'll live here for 30 or 40 years, and they really don't know much about it. I was telling the story the other day. I saw somebody from Miami who was older and remembered this, that Bahamian vegetable growers, Bahamian farmers would come over to Miami on weekends for farmers markets.
Really?
And they
That's
would sell
interesting.
vegetables in the farmers market. And a number of years ago, this is probably 80 years ago, a couple from the Bahamas came over and were selling vegetables in Miami. And the woman was very pregnant. And while in Miami selling vegetables, she had her child.
Really?
Sidney Poitier.
Oh,
Wow.
my goodness. Wow.
Interesting
What a great
story.
Yeah.
What a great
And of course,
story.
he's a citizen because he was born here.
Yeah.
in Jackson Memorial.
Well, that's very
Wow.
interesting.
No, I didn't know that.
I'll tell you a little piece of history. 11 years after we became a state, they founded, I'm a Mason, they founded the lodge in Apopka, which was known as Orange Lodge 36. And it was founded in 1856. The building's from 1859 and still there, and they still meet there. So it's kind of, but there was nothing else really in Orange County. It was a county called Orange, a lot of farmers, and the lodge was founded as a moon lodge because the only way to find it was by the light of the moon.
Well, what's amazing to me about that is you're absolutely right. The Apopka Lodge is number 36. And what that means is it was the southernmost lodge at the time. And there were 35 large lodges just in the Panhandle.
Yeah.
Wow.
Little towns, Mariana,
Yeah.
Milton,
Callahan and
places you've
all
never
those-
heard of.
right,
And
Pensacola.
before it
little
was called
towns.
Apopka, the town was called the Lodge. The original name of Apopka was the Lodge.
Yeah, because it was not only the lodge room, it was the general store,
Yes.
and it was the church. And it was everything.
everything, yeah.
That was it. And they formed the town right around this building, which
And it
was
almost
pretty
became the
interesting.
county seat.
Is that right?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Wow.
And now it's the second largest city in Orange County.
It sure is.
Yeah. Of course, politics. Everybody went to sweep it under the rug. And at home, I got a linoleum floor and it's glued. So sometimes it's easier to stay with politics. But lots of history in Florida politics in the book as well.
It's amazing. The people who have been elected governor, during this election year, you've heard people say that one candidate was the worst governor, and other people say, no, the other guy was the worst governor. But there really is no debate in Florida. Sidney J. Katz was the worst governor ever. He was elected in 1916, not as a Democrat or Republican, but as the Prohibitionist party candidate.
Okay.
And his campaign platform was that the Pope was preparing to invade Florida and take over the state.
Really?
And
he won on this
he
platform?
won on this platform.
And you think people are stupid today.
Well, and he promised, Al, that if he was elected, he would order the state troopers to search all the convents, which he said were being used to store weapons
Oh, my
for
God.
this revolution to overthrow. He was crazy. Just
But
absolutely
the crazier thing is he got elected.
He did. He did. It was wild.
Enough people bought it that he
Yeah.
became the
Well,
governor.
that's the funny thing is, we all think that people were more well-read back 20, 40, 60, 80 years ago, but people, I think, were just as dumb. I think they just used better language. Maybe that's what it is,
Yes.
So this is the dumbness of the stupidity of Americans generally is nothing really new. It's kind of just, it's a tradition to be a little ignorant.
Fuller Warren ran for governor in 1948 and later wrote a book about how he won. And he said that in Florida, the way to win was to use big words. And that was what impressed the voters.
Not our listeners, of course. Just so we clarify, not our listeners or viewers. You guys are the most brainiacal people we know. But as a rule, I'm just saying. So let's go. So Florida's a state in 1845. Nothing much happens in Florida for a while, right? Until the 1900s.
We remain. We joined the Confederacy, of course, for the Civil War, but as one northern newspaper said, we were the smallest tadpole in the cesspool of secession.
Well, that's why we have the X on the flag. It's a remembrance of the battle flag for the Confederacy. I think they did that back years ago. After the war was over, they were, we're going to keep the X. So it's the 1900s, and then Flagler's Railroad comes, right?
Well, Flagler comes in the 1880s.
1880s, yeah.
And begins building his railroad and begins inviting his wealthy friends like his business partner, John D. Rockefeller, to come down. And, you're talking about air conditioning making Florida. The two other things that I think made Florida were controlling mosquitoes, which was a huge problem. And the Navy lab in Orlando during World War II did the research on chemicals to control mosquitoes. And, of course, the original solution was to spray DDT everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And
that was the big one.
It killed mosquitoes and everything else.
Yes.
And in fact, the scientists who worked on the DDT also, on their own time, came up with the flea collar.
There you go.
Which originally had DDT on it.
Which originally had DDT.
So that's why Fido died. He had
DDT
around his neck. But Flagler, the second thing was a constitutional amendment that there would be no inheritance tax and no state income tax.
Aha.
And that lured all kinds of wealthy people.
And it still lures people down
here.
It
does.
Sure, yeah.
It does. I mean, people tell me that there are developments in Florida where famous wealthy people have homes and they've never seen them. That they live in London.
We have the strongest homestead law in the world.
Yeah,
in the world.
This as their official residence.
Yep. If it's your residence, they can't take it from you. They've been in bankruptcy. They can't seize the asset.
And when Bowie Kuhn, the former baseball commissioner, was about to go bankrupt, he came down and bought a multi-million-dollar home in Florida, and the creditors couldn't touch it.
Yeah.
So the railroad goes all the way to Key West. Another railroad leg goes, I believe, down to Tampa, and that opens the whole state up pretty much.
Yeah, a guy named Plant, Henry Plant, developed the West Coast, and he also developed the package vacation, where you'd buy a train ticket and included a hotel room and meals, and so it was a complete package that you could buy.
And then air conditioning comes in the 20s, right? And
mostly
30s?
in big stores and movie theaters. You see pictures of movie theaters, and the sign, instead of having the name of the movie at the top, had air conditioning at the top. And
I bet movies were really popular back then.
When it got hot and humid, very few people remember this now in Florida. In an era when there was no air conditioning and washing machines and dryers were very primitive, there were huge commercial laundries, and you would send everything you owned to these giant laundries, your sheets, your towels, your underwear, and people would get up in the night, sometimes twice, to change the sheets. They had gotten something wet. So
Wow.
it's hard to imagine that. But not only did air conditioning lure people here, but it made it possible to build an entire new kind of house. These cinder block houses. You couldn't have those in unair conditioned days. You'd fry.
Right.
You would. Well, it is time for us to take another pause along the network line here. Let us remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and of Tuff TV 38 in Orlando. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest is Dr. Jim Clark from the University of Central Florida History Department. His brand new book, A Concise History of Florida, 5 stars from here. Our conversation continues in a moment. We are back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area, we're seen on Tuff TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest in studio today, Dr. Jim Clark from the University of Central Florida History Department. I am proud to call Dr. Clark a colleague here at
That's right.
UCF.
We both teach at the University of Central Florida, the second largest university in America.
Yeah, we're proud of that. So in any event, it's nice to have you here. The occasion of your visit is your brand new book, A Concise History of Florida, from the History Press. And it's Barnes & Noble, barnesandnoble.com.
Amazon, and
Amazon.
it's on Kindle, too.
Okay, all right.
Download it.
It really is. It is just chock full of all kinds of interesting things. And I give you credit for this because people don't know about Florida. We really don't. As a kid growing up in Ohio, when I got into junior high school and senior high school, we were required to take a year of Ohio history.
Right.
And I don't know that the high schools in Florida do that anymore.
Even if they do, often the textbooks begin with the Pilgrims, not Ponce de Leon and the Spanish. So people come here without knowing a lot about it.
Okay.
And also, Bob Graham, former Senator Bob Graham, whom you're friends with, talks about this. He calls it Cincinnati syndrome, that people come here, and even if you've been here 40 years, if someone says, "Where are you from?" you say, "Cincinnati." You don't say,
that's right.
I'm from,
you don't
from
say
Florida.
Orlando.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's pretty funny.
It really is.
All right, so take us into the 20th century and some important things that occurred in Florida history.
Well, the land boom of the 1920s, just amazing. The numbers of people who flood in here looking for an opportunity to make their fortune in real estate. I spoke over in Lakeland at Florida Southern College a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking. One of the people who comes in 1925 is George Jenkins. He's going to make his fortune in real estate in Tampa, and he comes just as the bust is coming. The worst timing in the history of the world. And so he...
Like buying a house in 07 or 08.
Yeah, exactly.
Right here.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so he can't find any work at all. And finally, he gets a job as a clerk in a grocery store, and he learns the grocery business. Had no intention of going into the grocery business, and then moves to Winter Haven, opens his own store, and I believe the company is called Publix. Have you heard of that?
Look at that. See, well, you can't keep a good guy down.
Yeah. So I mean, just a fluke that because of the land bust, he ends up making his fortune in grocery stores.
Wow.
Claude Pepper, the former senator, came down here to make his fortune in 1925 in the land boom. He went bust also, so he turned to politics. So lots of people come here in the 20s. Miami Beach is developed by Carl Fisher, arguably one of the most brilliant men ever, inventor of the car headlight, inventor of the Indianapolis Speedway, and developer of Miami Beach. He filled it in. Land would sell for ever escalating prices, sometimes 5 and 6 times a day.
Wow.
Just people mad.
So about flipping. And the mafia's here. They run carpet joints, which are legal gambling casinos. And then in the summer they go up to Saratoga, New York. So they run this route from Miami Beach to Saratoga, New York.
Yeah, Florida during the 20s prohibition is supposed to be the law of the land. And of course, we know about Al Capone in Chicago, but Florida was the real center because it had so much abandoned beach. Anybody could get into the business. On Bimini, they built 9 huge warehouses to stock with liquor. And people from Florida would sail over in little boats and buy some and then come back and make a fortune. You could grow rich. And of course, the beauty of this was it was real liquor. It wasn't Al Capone's bathtub gin.
No, they would go to Bimini. It's an island off Florida, and
Miami,
and
right.
go and get the booze and
Get the
bring
real
it back.
stuff.
Yeah, it was Chavez Regal and quality Bacardi.
Oh, yeah.
And
You're making me thirsty. Stop, Jim.
so, yeah, Prohibition was just a time of absolute corruption. There was gambling. The sheriffs were involved in this. It was kind of an anything goes kind of a place.
We're almost out of time, but of course, World War II, you said, was big for Florida, and then, of course, Disney came.
World War II was huge for Florida. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers came to train here. The first President Bush trained here. John Kennedy trained here. And what ended up happening was that large numbers of these people fell in love with Florida and said, hey, after the war, I'm coming back, or hey, I'm going to retire here in 30 or 40 or 50 years. And they did. And so after the war, you have places like Cape Coral down in southwest Florida, in Deltona, which become big cities thanks to retirees.
And also, Key West becomes the home of Harry Truman, right?
Harry Truman, people
Southern
don't
White
realize
House.
Harry Truman spent 8 months of his presidency in Key West.
Wow.
He loved Key West. It was free because it was a Navy base and he didn't have any money. So he'd get free vacations, but he loved Key West. He would stay for a month at a time.
And the poker games were historic.
Yes.
That's for
Yes.
sure. Jim, unfortunately, the clock does run awfully fast when we get a chance to sit down and visit with you, but we do thank you for being here with us today. And again, let me remind folks that the book is A Concise History of Florida. It is from the History Press by Dr. James C. Clark. He's from the University of Central Florida History Department. Come on out and grab a course in some Florida history with Jim.
Please do.
And but again, I say 5 stars on the book from here. We think it's just a marvelous piece of work. So, and come back and do this again when the next one's ready.
I will do that.
All
I want to write a history of UCF next.
You're on. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
We'll close out in a moment. This is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And always a pleasure to have Jim Clark with us, a knowledgeable man about what goes on and what has happened in the state of Florida that we never knew about.
And he's a former radio TV guy, so, you put us in a room, and it's a morning show here on Florida Roundtable.
There you go. That's
Good humored fella.
Yeah.
So right now we have Krista outpacing Scott 6-1 for the finance period covering October 4th through the 10th.
Woo.
Scott's campaign raised just $606,000 some odd dollars compared to Chris $3.2 million. So Scott may kick into his own money again like he did 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Scott's Let's Get to Work political committee raised just $127,000, mostly from Fidelity National Financial, a Fortune 500 company that provides commercial and residential mortgages. Chris' political committee collected 8 checks of at least $100,000 during the week, including several law firms, another $200,000 from the Democratic Governors Association. So, the money raised the last push there, Reagan.
Last big push. And, now just we are really in the home stretch now. So if you turn your TV on, doesn't matter where it is, just be prepared to be bombarded. And,
absolutely, which is why I'm not going to watch any television for the next
except for our
few weeks. Right, of course, except for Tuff TV.
Yeah.
Well, that goes without saying.
That's right.
And it just goes to show you that it's coming down to the wire. In fact, here's saying that Governor Scott in 2012 says he won't have to use his own money, but now Charlie Crist outraised him 6-1. Scott appears ready to open up the piggy bank. Reagan, he spent $56.5 million on ads to Crist $26.5 million, both heavily negative. Yet he and Crist remain tied, even though he's outspent him 2-1. So it'll be interesting to see how this how this pans out. The quote is, "If I put in money, it would be nothing compared to what Tom Steyer, the radical left-wing billionaire from the West Coast, is helping Charlie with to bring these policies to Florida," Scott said.
Boy, this has been, and the numbers aren't in yet, but I think we're on safe ground.
I'm voting for Adrian Wiley.
But this is going to be the most expensive gubernatorial race in the history of the United States, even more than they spend in California.
The power hunger is palpable. Right?
Oh, it really is. Well, it is time for us to kind of wrap things up here. We do thank you for your company this day, and we'll invite you back next week. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Thank you for listening to the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.